There's three types of athletes. There's an okay athlete, there's a good athlete, and then there's elite athletes. An okay athlete just turns up to training. They just do the bare minimum. A good athlete, they show up. They're showing up with a little bit of enthusiasm. A great athlete, they show up to win every single day. Welcome to the Elevated Athlete Podcast. We're here with another episode, and today we're talking the top 10 performance principles if you want to be a top 10% athlete. Now, as with every episode, we start with a couple of mindful breaths. So wherever you are on the road, whether you're listening to it or at home watching on YouTube, never underestimate the power of 2 quality deep breaths. So take a nice deep inhale through the nose, open mouth exhale. Last one, nice big inhale and exhale. Let's get started. So I'm going to list out the 10 performance principles to edge into the top 10% as an athlete. The first one is, the only mistake is not responding to the mistake. You see, we can't deny the fact that we're not going to make any more mistakes in our career. It's going to happen. But our ability to respond to the mistake is what matters most. You see, if we don't accept the fact that we make a mistake or we made a mistake, we're just going to stay in a state of frustration and redhead, and we're going to make more mistakes. And so I want to bring you the 3 A's to maybe help you in the future. The first A is awareness. We need to be aware that the mistake that we made rattled us, frustrated us. And so by being understanding of your emotions and your thoughts in those moments and gaining awareness over them, we can change the action that you take after it. So the first A is awareness. The second A is acceptance. We can't move into optimal action after making a mistake if we're still in a state of frustration or denial that we made the original mistake. So we need to accept that we made the mistake and focus on responding to the next moment. And then the third A is action. You want to translate this awareness and this acceptance that you have into a 60-second action that you can take that's going to get you mentally back into the performance and gaining confidence again so you don't move into your shell. Now, one of the things I quickly need to touch on with the not responding to the mistake and then making more mistakes is the frustration trap. And that is, I'm frustrated at the fact that I'm frustrated because I think I shouldn't be frustrated. And what happens is we get in this spiral because we're like, oh, my mind's better than this. I'm doing all this mindset training or I'm doing all this mental skills and I'm frustrated and I shouldn't be frustrated. And then we get frustrated at the fact we're frustrated. And then that is what keeps us in a resistant state and often keeping more mistakes. And this is where the acceptance comes in. So awareness that we're frustrated, acceptance that we're frustrated, and then a 60-second action that you can take that mentally gets you back into the performance and getting confident again. So that's number 1. Performance principle number 2 is focus on being in a pull state, not a push state. Now, I'm sure you may have experienced burnout or loss of motivation or even the thoughts of potentially wanting to give up. When we look at the push-pull mentality, we can either be pulled into our life by being inspired, by being nurtured as a human, by having joy and gratitude for the things in our life, or we can neglect those things and it becomes a push. It becomes a grind. Now, I'm not at all saying that you don't need to not push as an athlete. You need to push. I'm just talking about the energy and the mentality behind it. If we're pulled because we've nurtured the human, we've got joyful things in our life, we've got things that bring us, fill up our cup, what we're going to do is we're going to find that we've got this really strong foundation of being pulled into the goals that we want to achieve, rather than resisting those things, putting them to the side, and we're just focusing on our sport and we become rigid and we become, sort of mentally frustrated, and we just sort of trap ourselves in this box of only focusing on performances. And that's where burnout happens. That's where loss of motivation happens, and that's where wanting to give up happens. And so speaking to some of Australia's top athletes the other day, as we start to build out their season 2025 plan, we talked exactly about the 3 H's. In order to get the hero, which is the last H, thriving, we need to have the first H, which is the human, optimized. We need to optimize the human in order for the hero, the performer within you, to shine. And then in the middle is the habit. So we've got human, habits, hero. And the hero shines on the biggest under the bright lights because the human is looked after, it's got habits in place, and then the hero just needs to do what they do best. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to focus on having a strong foundation of our things that bring us joy and gratitude in our lives and happiness. And such by having that, we're going to be more in a pulled state and naturally inspired rather than a push state. Number 3 is upgrading the way that you view discipline. What discipline has been typically known as is grit, push, hard work, trust the process, effort. Normally these things come to mind. But they're all physical discipline. I want to talk about mental discipline. How are we responding to errors? How are we not letting our irrationalities take over? How are we not letting instant gratification seep in? How are we not letting our doubts control our mind and then that impacts the actions that we take in our performance? How are we responding mentally to getting dropped in the team? These are all mental disciplines that we train and develop as a skill, so then the physical disciplines can take over. If you're mentally ill-disciplined, you're going to be physically ill-disciplined. So by having mental discipline and creating mental disciplines in those skills, in mental skills, physical discipline naturally takes over. Okay, if you're clear and calm in the mind, that's not representing its actions. So upgrading the way you view discipline is a mindset shift to focus on creating mental discipline, and that will translate into physical discipline. Number 4, the one thing to go from good performances to great performances is overcoming fear. And I want to welcome you in on a case study and a story after working with an athlete overseas as we're going back and forth and talking about this very thing, which is how do we go from having a lot of okay performances to how do we step into having great performances? And as we look into this client's story, I want to list out the things that he came back to me about what he was fearing. And by overcoming these things, he's able to free the mind and get onto the task and execute and move into those great performances. He said he feared getting dropped, not earning the contract upgrade, fearing what his teammates would think of him, not having a financially stable income from his career or in his sport, letting his teammates down, what his coaches were going to think of him. There's 6 big things playing on his mind. Now, by working on our mind and overcoming those fears, what we do is we release the pressure in the mind. We no longer have those fears. We play fearless and we step into great performances naturally. And we don't step into great performances naturally by focusing on the physical and trying to compete with the fear. We step into it by emotionally overcoming the fear, and the great performances naturally happen because we no longer fear what could be on the other side. And so by overcoming fear, you move away from okay performances and you step into great performances. Number 5, training the skill of simplicity to achieve more. Every result that we get is a byproduct of the mental momentum that we had. We need to be in a state of presence and focus in order to optimize into the actions that we take. If we're not present and focused, the actions that we take are going to be reflective of that. And this is why we created the momentum blueprint. It's a clear plan and blueprint that allows our athletes to stay really in flow and focused during their performances, and it gives the mind guardrails so it doesn't go erratic, so it doesn't get frustrated and go in all these different directions and overplay and underplay and do all these things. The momentum blueprint is specifically designed to keep the mind in momentum, okay? So then you take physical action, you get physical momentum. So the mind being in momentum translates into kicking the pass, throwing the ball, whatever it may be, kicking the pass. That didn't make any sense at all. Kicking the ball or throwing the pass. So what it does is it keeps the mind tamed. And by focusing on less, you achieve more. Okay, that's also a sign of a great athlete and a competent athlete in their skills is they know by focusing on few things, those few things control the rest of the things. So what I mean by that is if you look at the best athletes in the world, they master the foundations, they nail the foundations, and then everything else, the bitter moments take care of themselves because they are focusing on less. They're able to nail those foundations. Then they can see more in the performance. They're more present. They're more able, they've got a broader perspective in the performance, and then they can execute and nail those big moments because they do have a simple mind. Now, if the mind isn't simple and the mind is cluttered, it's not going to be able to adjust and pivot on the run as it needs to in a performance because it's so rigid and bogged down by all of the information you're trying to hold. So less is more, and embracing the skill of simplicity allows you to achieve more in your performances. Number 6, you achieve flow by not focusing on achieving flow. There's so many empty words that are used in the sporting world. Two of the biggest being presence and flow. I was speaking to one of our athletes the other day and they asked me a simple question. They said, Jared, how do I achieve flow in my performances? And I said, you achieve flow by not trying to achieve flow. It sounds counterproductive, right? You think by focusing on something, you achieve something, but not with flow. The mind is different to the physical body. We can't try and achieve a state in the mind the same way that we tell the body to kick the ball. I'll tell you why. By telling yourself, I need to be in flow, I need to find flow, you actually reaffirm a part of the mind, the subconscious mind, that you're not in flow. And then you realize that you're not in flow and you become resistant to the fact that you're not in flow. Achieving flow and presence is really just a byproduct of being focused. The more focused that you are, the more clear that you are, the more simple that you are, going back into principle number 5, the more likely you're going to be present and in flow. And the funny thing about being in presence and flow is you can't take a moment to realize you're in presence and flow because that defeats the purpose of being in presence and flow. So the best way to achieve presence and flow is by focusing on less and nailing your performance blueprint like I spoke about in the last principle. And by doing that, you stay in mental momentum and then things naturally start to happen in your performances. So just elaborating on what we spoke about with our athletes is, I want to be in flow. You realize you're not in flow state. Then you get angry at yourself for not being in flow state. Or another one is you want to be present. You realize you're not present. And then you get frustrated at the fact that you're not present. So what we do is by having a simple game plan and a simple blueprint for our performances using the momentum blueprint, we give the mind boundaries and focus points. And then as a byproduct, by focusing on them, you then finish your performances and go, holy shit, I was so present and in flow in those performances. But you were just so in the moment that you couldn't even realize it in the moment. You were just doing your thing naturally. So again, stop using empty words. Use the mind to your advantage. Give it some clear boundaries, some clear focus points, and then the achieving of flow and presence just will naturally happen. Number 7. The athlete who responds the best wins. Every performance is made up of hundreds or thousands of small moments. The best athletes in the world can have one poor moment and make sure the next moment is great. Okay athletes, they have one poor moment and that might leak into 2 or 3 or 4 more poor moments, or even the rest of their performance they go into their shell. The best athletes in the world see a performance as a makeup of 1,000 small moments and they realize they just need to execute one moment at a time. And if they under-deliver on one moment, they need to bounce back and deliver on the next moment. And when you finish your performance, the athlete or the team, depending on what sport you're in, that executed and delivered on more moments wins the performance because they executed more moments. So the athlete who responds the best wins. And they're able to make a mistake and stay neutral in the process, come back to what their game plan is and what their process is, and execute the next moment. So if you want to be one of the great athletes, you want to train your mind and teach your mind to respond to every moment. So when you finish your performance, you look back and realize that you nailed more moments than you didn't. And because of that, you're more likely to get the result that you want to get in your outcomes or in your performance, sorry. Number 8. Your state of mind produces your outcomes. Let me fill you in with a little model or a little triangle. A moment happens, so a stimulus happens in your performance, as when that happens, that triggers a thought in the minds. Okay, before action is taken, it needs to filter through minds. Let's say you lose the ball, right? So lose the ball is the event. That triggers a thought in the mind. That thought provokes a feeling in the body. That feeling then will then drive the action that you take. Based on those actions, you then create the outcomes that you get and then create informed beliefs, okay, about yourself. But coming back, we can realize that your state of mind produces the actions that you take, and your actions produce the results that you get. So by optimizing your mind, by creating simple pathways for your mind, by training your mental skills, by having a clear, calm, and confident mind, that's going to translate into the actions that you take, and that's going to translate into the results that you get. On one side, let's say the mind's cluttered. That cluttered mind's going to then produce like a cluttered or a suboptimal action, and then actions produce results that you aren't going to be happy with, because results are only reflected in the actions that we take. If we look on the other side, if your mind's clear and calm and confident, okay, and you've got your emotions under control, that's then going to produce an optimal action, and then results, like we said, are byproducts of action. So that means we're going to get optimal results. And it all comes back to the state of mind that you're in. Because like I said, the actions that we take are only extensions of the thoughts that we have in our mind. Number 9, a prepared mind is a focused mind. There's 3 types of athletes. There's an okay athlete, there's a good athlete, and then there's elite athletes. An okay athlete just turns up to training. They just do the bare minimum. A good athlete, they show up. They're showing up with a little bit of enthusiasm. A great athlete, they show up to win every single day. And that's how great athletes become great, or elite athletes become great, because they show up to win every day. And the reason why they show up to win, or how they can show up to win every day, is they know exactly what they're doing every single day on how they're going to win that day. If you walked into a team environment, your day is laid out by your coaching staff, your coaches. But they're not taking into everyone's specific needs. So if you want to focus on developing leadership, I was speaking to an athlete a couple of years ago, they wanted to develop leadership. But their coaching staff is not building out the whole curriculum for the day around that one player's desire to want to improve leadership. So they needed to focus on that individually, on how they were going to install leadership traits or actions throughout the day in order to improve that leadership skill, how they wanted to improve leadership. So what I'm saying here is, by creating a clear plan of how you're going to win that day, not only do you show up with motivation and inspiration, you show up with focus and clarity. Okay, and when you enter the field, when you step onto the field, or when you step onto the arena, or whatever it is that you're training in your environment, you clearly know what you need to get done today to elevate yourself as an athlete. And it takes an extra 10 minutes in the morning, preparing your day. And that's the difference between being an okay performer, which just turns up and they get the bare minimum contracts, they're in and out of the starting team, they're in and out of the roster. If not, they're not playing at all, versus a good athlete who shows up. They show up with enthusiasm and intent and a desire to want to get up there. But the great athletes, the elite athletes of every sport globally, they know exactly what they're doing each and every day that's going to improve them as an athlete. And they do that day in, day out. And that's the difference over the time. The last principle of these performance principles to get into the top 10% as an athlete is, we only ever have 2 paths. We have the path of the suboptimal self, the limited self, and we have the path of the optimal self, the best self, or what I like to call the alter ego. We created a system called the alter ego advantage, which allows athletes to build their alter ego out from start to finish. And by doing so, they have an unfair advantage in their performances, because they can clearly see the traits, the habits, the actions of their best self and how their best self would act in any given moment. And we create that. We have clarity on the alter ego, which is we also have clarity on what the alter ego isn't, the lower version of ourselves. And so in any given moment, we have the path of taking action in the courageous self, the alter ego, or we have the limited self, which turns into just being a good athlete, playing it safe, having okay performances, and just doing what we need to do. And so in any given moment in our performances, whether it's in training or in a match, we have a choice and a path. We play fearless and we move down the courageous side and lean into our alter ego. Or we go down the other side, we stay limited, we tap our potential, and we take action in alignment with our lower self. And so we only ever have two paths that we take action down. So team, that is 10 performance principles if you want to edge into the top 10% as an athlete. I hope you enjoyed the episode today, and I look forward to being back with you in a few weeks.